Hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. So nice to have you with us today. It's a pretty sunny Wednesday afternoon here in West Virginia. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we're happy to have you come and be a part of our discussion about the big things that are happening in the world today and in the future. I'm joined today by friends Gregg Braden. Hi, Gregg. How are you, sir?
John, it's good to see you, and Mark and Penny. I'm looking forward to our program today. I'm coming to you from our studio outside of Santa Fe. And yesterday afternoon, the long-awaited monsoon season began with torrential downpours. So if I lose you today, I'll be back as soon as I can.
Okay. We had our torrential downpour yesterday here. Hello, Penny Kelly.
It's wild.
How are you?
I'm good. And it's pretty cloudy here. So I am hoping that you'll bring some of that sunshine, send some of that sunshine our way, John. Hi, Mark. Hi, Gregg.
And Mark Gober. Hi, Mark. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here. And I'm glad we escaped the torrential downpours we had on the East Coast here a few days ago.
Oh, yeah. We had 60-mile-an-hour winds. There were trees all over the place and a great deal of water. But anyway, the sun is shining today. It's a nice day. So we get together like this every 2 weeks to talk about the big, deep issues that are in the middle of this amazing kind of transition to a new world. It's time for our questions. We've got 3 questions today that our listeners have sent in, and we appreciate them very much, all of them. And then Alex Shiva from Chile says, among other things, he says, I think the paradigm shift is going to be very different from what we can or how far we can imagine it is going to be, because it should include our corporeal structure, as you have mentioned, and a way of manifesting and solving needs. I imagine a brilliantly creative world of joy and immeasurable well-being. The concern I have is how to help or support those who have no idea what is happening and are all inoculated, living as if nothing has happened. And there are many of these people. What will happen to them? Because I think because this is about assuming a personal responsibility. What do you have to say about that, my friends?
I think people live in their own private world. Everybody is in their own private world. And so if they think that nothing has happened, then for them, nothing has happened. And until they perceive that something has shifted, they aren't going to be interested in other people coming in and raining on their parade. So it's, when they recognize that they have a problem, I think they'll stand up, they'll be asking questions, they'll do something. What we could do at that point is offer support, information, direction, whatever. But until then, it's an interference in their world.
Yeah, I'm with you, and it goes back to your initial response to the question, and says it's kind of everybody's personal kind of situation that we have to work on, and we're the only ones that we can work on it. And in an interesting way, I feel for me at least, the responsibility is for myself, and everybody else gets a chance to make their own decisions, and it's not my job to evangelize the world, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think part of the answer to this question is going to tie into our topic of today, John. And the reason I say that is because, yes, to everything you and Penny have just said, and the decisions and the responsibility are made based on the way we are conditioned to think about ourselves and about the world and our relationship to the world. And for about 30 years, there has been an intentional dumbing down of the mainstream. I just saw examples of this. I was watching some videos to prepare for this conversation where where the interviewers were going into higher educational campuses. Stanford University, for example, was one of the ones that I saw, and asking college level individuals, both male and female, crossed ethnic backgrounds, fundamental questions that you and I would think would be common knowledge that they couldn't answer. How many states are in America? What is the capital of our country? They couldn't answer these things. Simple math they couldn't do, but they knew who Taylor Swift was, and they knew about the Kardashians, intimate details of their lives. So there has been a conscious effort, I believe, to dumb down the general population. And it's based upon that dumbed down worldview that people are watching what's happening in the world. And so I agree with both of you. If, as long as they can go down to Sonic drive-through and, get a shake and a burger, and they got a paycheck coming from whatever they're doing, the rest of the world they're pretty oblivious to.
Yeah.
Wow. I'd like to share an anecdote from my own personal experience. When I came out with my first book in 2018, I was so excited to share a new paradigm about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness. And I knew so many people in my network, and I wanted to show them the scientific evidence. And some people, it was like talking to a wall. They just didn't want to hear it. So it was a learning experience for me when presenting information that is potentially paradigm shifting. Everyone's on their own time frame, including myself, including each of us individually. Yeah. And I've also learned that each person has different paradigms in different areas. So some people might be open to shifting in certain ways and not others. And so I agree with what you're saying earlier, Penny, about, we're on our own journey and we do our best individually, and we're here to support people as they awaken. I think trying to control other people is something we can't do.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. One of the beautiful things about the paradigm as we now understand it, and it will change as we understand more, is that not everyone has to understand the same thing or arrive at the same conclusion to benefit from a relatively few number of people who aspire to a more beautiful world of freedom and health and peace. Because as we feed that into the field, it becomes the bridge. It's easier for other people to then access that in their lives without necessarily following the same path or even agreeing with the same principles. So that's the beauty. There's the fractal principle that's at work, the holographic principle, and the entanglement principles are all at work here. And the beauty is you don't have to know any of it to benefit from it.
Right.
Well, thank you all. That's a wonderful segue into our topic of today. And so let me set this up by suggesting, as Gregg has implied, that today has been a long time coming. The environment that we live in today, the context is the product of a great deal of sophisticated and highly funded and other kind of initiatives to essentially condition the space, condition the environment that we live in right now. And it starts with the things like putting fluoride in the water and glyphosate in the food, and 5G into the electromagnetic spectrum, and any number of other kind of things like that is essentially surrounding who we are as individuals. We talked last time about the digitization of humanity and all of the different kind of component and elements of our reality, and in a very systematic, organized way that that if you study these things, if you look at them, you cannot, I don't think, not come away and say, wait a second, this is so big and so sophisticated and so organized and orchestrated that there is some kind of a clear effort to capture the narrative and define the narrative that is all going on. At the same time, then you look at this and you say this from an arm's length, and you get back and you say, so what's happening here? What's it? And you see that this emergence of a new world and a new human that is the distinct possibility coming out of this from the positive point of view. On one hand, you have this dystopian direction that we've just described, all this digitization, technocracy, and so on. But on the other hand, it's this giant, extraordinary, unprecedented kind of evolutionary jump in humanity that's going in another direction, in this new direction that can produce a new human and a new world out of that. And you got to say to yourself, so how does that happen? And how do we encourage it? I guess you could argue on one hand, some might say, is that it'll self-organize itself into a new world and a new human and so on. And it'll take some time, but we'll finally get there. I take another position, and I say that we're at this time, we're debating and talking about this stuff because we are able to do so for the first time in all of history. We're able to see and understand the kind of the big sweep of what's going on. We have technology and capabilities to be able to make sense out of it in ways we've never been able to before. We're able to now build scenarios, alternative pictures and visions of what the futures might be, which no one could ever do before. And that all gives us the capability, and in fact, I would argue the responsibility to then play an active role in determining what our future is likely to be. We can do this for the first time in all of human history, as we understand it at this point. And essentially, there needs to be a counterbalance to the clear and very sophisticated efforts that are in place to drive this off into this technocratic world. And so the question then for us today is, so how do we capture the narrative? How do we change the narrative? How do we present a new narrative that's a that counters the direction that all of the effort and the money and of the mainline media is producing? How do those of us who are interested in encouraging and facilitating the transition to this new world, how do we start to do that in practical terms?
I think community is essential in this process of like-minded people finding one another and also being together in person. I was at a conference 2 months ago called Rebels for a Cause in Tennessee, and the organizer, Courtney Turner, her thought behind this conference was there's clearly a transhumanistic agenda to dehumanize people, and the anecdote is to be radically human. And an essential part of that is to be together in person. And we saw what happened during COVID. We were separated from each other. And even when we were in person, we were encouraged to be 6 feet apart from each other. There's something energetically, I don't fully understand it, that goes on when people are together in person. So I think that's an essential aspect to proliferating this new narrative.
When you look back through time and you review kind of the history of our planet, where did the narratives change in the past? And that, what you see when you do that, is there are 2 major, I'll call them influences, that cause the narrative to shift big time. One is some sort of big natural disaster. What happens is the magnetic shields fluctuates, and when it goes down, there's a lot of, I'm going to say, physical uproar in the planet. You know, Mama Earth has just got a bellyache, and she lets us know. So that's the natural disaster is one thing. The other thing, which we also see happening, is that there's some kind of major exploration. So the last big narrative change was like Christopher Columbus and Pizarro and Cortez and Magellan. They went around the planet and came back. They didn't fall off the edge. And so there was a change in people's understanding of the entire planet. We're now at a point where we have all kinds of whistleblowers saying, hey, we got other people here from other places, and they have other technology, and they have other media and communication. They wear different clothes, they have different weapons, and blah, blah, blah. And so those two things are the two big things that drive a major narrative change. So what happens is we go from a small world to a much larger world. And I'm going to say that I think we're going from a small planet to an interplanetary set of relationships right now. And we do see planetary and solar system change big time. Lots of people are really susceptible to what's happening with the Schumann resonance and higher, when we have an X-class flare, and I think we've had 2 in the last week or 10 days. So that's a big deal. And then I think the final thing I would say is that timing is everything. So you can't have a narrative change by shoving it down people's throats. You have to stand back. You have to develop your thinking and be listening for where's the narrative changing elsewhere. And we have it changing in politics. It's underground. If you come into the middle of the country, there's a whole different narrative happening that isn't happening in Washington, D.C. The economy, the narrative there is changing. The medical system, that narrative is changing. The same thing with education. Science narratives are changing. All kinds of base of the 12 sectors that make up a world are all getting a new narrative, and those are bubbling. It's like the soup is heating up, it's getting ready to boil, and once it boils, the flavors will meld and release throughout the entire pot of soup. And I think the second last thing I would say is that linear perception leads to linear thinking. And linear thinking is based on, gotta wait to see what happens here before we can decide what to do there, because we're waiting to see what the outcome is. And when you have a switch or move to multidimensional thinking, you don't wait for outcomes, you make outcomes. Why don't people in linear thinking make outcomes? Because they don't think they have any power.
In the past, the narratives that we're talking about were more or less spontaneous. And I think one of the things that we have available to us now is we have the technology to create a narrative on demand, not waiting for something to happen, but to actually actively participate in triggering that narrative. Right now, Penny, I agree, we have many narratives. Those narratives are fragmented because there is no unifying narrative that's happening. So when I looked at your question, John, you're asking about the way I interpreted the question was the specifics. How do we go about doing something like this? I think the template is already in place. It's been used for things that we don't agree with. And if we can look at the template that's out there right now, so the one that I have found very effective in separating our society and in breaking the social bonds, it tells us it's a good template. It's just a bad application. I go back to the work of Saul Alinsky and his book, Rules for Radicals, where he identified very specific steps in how to organize mass thought and how to take that thought from contemplation into action. And for me, the most effective, and I think it's what we could do with the new human story that you're talking about. He said there are four steps. You pick a target. So you have to identify specifically what it is that you're going to zero in on, and then you freeze it. So that becomes the front and center. And we're seeing this happen. The media will do this. They'll pick one thing, all the networks, it'll be the indictment of Trump, or it'll be the UAP, or whatever it is. And they'll freeze that, and everything is all about that. And then you personalize it. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you make it relevant to the individual. So what does it mean to you in your life? How is it going to affect your family? How does it affect your future, your retirement, your paycheck, your savings, all those, your health, all those kind of things? The fourth step for Saul Alinsky was, after you pick the target, freeze it, and personalize it, you polarize it. That's what is happening now to separate us, blacks against whites, men against women, rich against poor, adults against children. This is how this is being done. So if we follow that same template, instead of polarizing it, we actually identify the benefits. So you pick a target, whatever it is. Maybe it is, we've talked about agriculture, the disappearance of agriculture. If it's personal about the human body, we could talk about the immune system. You pick that target, you freeze it. What does that mean to you? You personalize it. And then you identify the benefits of the new way of thinking. And you do it across all of the media technologies that we now have available that weren't available in the past. You do it with short segments on, YouTube Reels, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, TikTok. You do it on longer format. You do this in conversations, and this is where Mark's community comes in. I couldn't agree with you more, Mark, but social scientists found after COVID was they had to rearrange the priorities for the human body. They used to be that water was number one, and food they thought was important. Well, you can go days without food, but community is now number two. We need human contact, and the depression and suicides from COVID are what brought that to the forefront. So the communities are important. They are based around the common beliefs and the common values that come up through these steps. So you have a community, if you're working on, you're identifying the new human story of what the immune system means and how it has the power to ward off whatever it is that's coming downstream. Then you have a whole community that is built around that. You pick that target, you freeze it, you personalize it, and then you identify those benefits, and that will draw people together. And the new ideas about how that's implemented, and that's what brings community together, is the common bonds of values and beliefs.
Well, I would agree with you completely, and you raised the question in an interesting way, because somehow we have to capture the mechanism, utilize the mechanism in a new way, invent a new mechanism essentially to tell a new story. And so there's essentially two kind of converging things, it seems to me, that need to happen here. And one of them is that we've got to have a new story. You can argue that, as I have earlier, that, if you sit around long enough, it'll all come together and people will get there in time. Or you can put in place and start to be proactive in terms of building an integrated, coherent new story. And of course, you all know that that's what we're trying to do here at the Arlington Institute, is to try to stand up, particularly with our transition, that kind of program, a global kind of conversation about what that new story could be like in general, but more specifically, what a vision would show up into and what we would like this new world to look like. And absent that, then everybody's got a different idea, or a dramatically different idea, or no idea at all in any kind of hard, tangible terms. And the whole kind of notion is, how do you get entrainment? How do you get a bunch of people together thinking about some way so that we can work our way toward the future we want? I think you need to keep in mind that there's a great deal of energy. There's a great deal of power that's trying to build the dystopian kind of scenario here and narrative. And it is very well organized and highly funded and very sophisticated. And so, in a sense, we've got to put in place something that is can effectively counter this amazing and legacy system that's been kind of orchestrated and put together specifically to drive this system in another direction. So we got to do something that's different. And it starts with a vision and some kind of an idea about where we want it to go. And then the question is proliferating. And how do you get that message out to people in quite the same kind of terms that you've just talked about, Gregg?
Yes, I think new news services we need a new news service, that people always ask me where we can go, for reliable information. But, this conversation is not happening in a vacuum. And the disclosure process that is going on, one of the factors is that when we find out that we are genetically related to life, and perhaps many different kinds of lives from different parts of the universe, what that does is it changes our story. All of a sudden, the idea of Darwin's idea of evolution, which we already know isn't true, it loses even more credibility. And that's what you were talking about, John. It opens the door to that new narrative. If we are part of these amazing forms of life that are traveling across the universe to come and visit us, what does that mean for us? What are the capabilities? What are the potentials that we haven't been told about, that we haven't yet tapped? And that is a very powerful narrative to open the door. And you're already seeing it with the movies. Young people are drawn to the movies where people awaken their latent superpowers because they sense that they have those in themselves.
Yeah, you're right. And Joe Rogan reaches a lot of people, but I'd argue that it's far more powerful to have a coherent story that has visuals, i.e. a movie or videos and other kinds of things, because that then starts to build images in people's minds in a different way about what these possibilities were. And so what I'm kind of arguing for, I think, is some kind of an alternative media company or a group or whatever that is very sophisticated in being able to use the imagery and the capabilities that now exist to start to produce an alternative to the mainline kind of organizations that are in place already.
I'll be brief here, but I think there's a meta issue around the education system itself and what children are taught. And right now they're basically funneled into a certain way of thinking. I certainly came from that, and it's been a process to break away. So I think getting to the root cause here of how do we introduce ideas, a variety of ideas and critical thinking to children at a young age is very important.
Oh, yes.
I couldn't agree more. And this is actually, it's going back to what you and John were just saying. In a society where we have dumbed down for at least a couple of generations, our young people, you cannot introduce a new narrative through facts and seminars and lectures. And this is, John, why I agree 100%. This is where film comes in. You've got to tell a story.
I'm thinking about the fact that I was thinking about the climate change issue, the fact that I grew up as kind of a farmer that really has continued that. I still live that lifestyle. Everything about the climate narrative is BS. The whole safety issue, that's not safety. I mean, if we sign that document, it's one of the things I was thinking about earlier. We can just say, look, we're making the rules. How dumb can you be? If you make the rules and you don't like them, shouldn't you change them? And we think like that, though? Once that document is signed and the U.S. has medical and other sovereignty, then what? Can we say, oh, sorry, we're not going for that? People, that really is the linchpin for the breakup of the U.S. Once the U.S. hands over their sovereignty, people are going to say, well, we don't have any U.S. anymore anyway. So that really bothers me. So that's the wow.
In terms of building this new narrative, it strikes me that there are two general categories to focus on. One is themes. So sovereignty, freedom. I don't know exactly what all those are, but there are themes that people can unite around generally. And the other to me is information, facts, evidence, because right now there's so many different realities people are living in based on the information that they've received. So there's got to be some process of exposing people to lots of facts. So this new treaty is something that many people are not even aware of. And if they were aware of it, they might be upset and they might want to do something about it. So there's something about getting more information to people that's essential to this process.
Yeah, well, Mark,
in a way
that's
they can digest.
yeah, well, that's what's happening because the information sources have been hijacked. So we are, if I go down, I live in a rural area, northern New Mexico, and Penny, I grew up in rural Missouri, baling hay on farms, and I'm right there with you. And I was just up with my community this last weekend. You know, those people, they're talking about whether it's going to rain. They're talking about, you know, what's happening in their kids' schools. There was a shooting in a 14-year-old boy shot a 13-year-old girl in a rural community here in northern New Mexico. That's never happened before. And so that's where their focus is in their lives. They have no idea about a pandemic treaty, about the agreement between the World Economic Forum and the United Nations to implement 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They're going to change the way they farm because the corporations are driving them out of business. They won't give them the subsidies to help them in bad times. They lose the farm, the corporations buy them, and now they're huge corporate farms, GMO, you know, pesticides, all those things. But they're not aware of these things, and they won't be, because where they get their information has been hijacked, Mark. That's specifically to your point. And this is what John was saying earlier. When you want to change a nation, the first thing you're going to do, I mean, this is like a CIA op from the inside. The first thing you do is you take the information systems under control.
So thank you all for this delightful and interesting kind of conversation. It's always fun to get together and explore these kinds of things. For those of you who are our viewers, Quartet is a production of the Arlington Institute, and we hold forth here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, our little resort town just down the road from Washington and Baltimore. And this is only one of a number of different outreaches and programs that we have. We have a monthly lecture series called Transition Talks, and Penny and Gregg have been with us for years now. Gregg will be with us here in just 2 weeks, I think, on the 26th. Is that what it is, Gregg? 26th?
It's in August. That's all I know. It's in August.
Yeah, right. I think it's the 26th of August, and we've got a sellout crowd, and we're going to be building live stream, and it's going to be a really great day. And we got a whole bunch of interesting people lined up, and you can find out all that information on transitiontalks.org, and you can find out everything else about us from that location as well. We're got a lot of free things, including the newsletter and so on, that'll help kind of shed some light on where we're going, where this is all going. So thank you all again to our viewers, for sure, because this isn't worth much if we're just talking to ourselves every day. And also to the four of you, the three of you, or the four of us, I guess, for being a part of this conversation. And whatever happens, it's going to be very interesting in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be back with you then with Quartet, and we hope that you'll come back and join us. Thanks so much to all of you. Take care.
Thank you, Mark and Penny. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you, everybody listening as well.
Yep. Really enjoyed it. Thank you all.